All right. Good evening. Today is February 13th, 2016. We are here in South Burnaby with the BC LaRouche chapter meeting. As I was saying a few minutes ago, the collapse of the system, which is now taking place, would be absolutely horrific beyond belief if there was nothing to take its place, nothing to represent a new positive direction for mankind. Now, tonight, I'm going to discuss the future that is going to belong to you all. And this is the future also of Canada, and it's the future of humanity. And this future is enfolded in a vision about the nature of the human species, a vision of the future, a vision of the nature of the human being, of humanity. And this vision is not a new vision, but I'm going to go through this vision and how this vision is not dead, but is actually being coming back in a very powerful way. And so our story begins in Europe. The story begins in Europe, which is being destroyed by Venice through mercenary armies and religious wars, not wars, but wars of plunder, and a Black Death, and a banking collapse. And in the middle of this collapse of Europe in the 1300s, going into the 1400s, a conception of man that emerged, which had its antecedent in the Platonic aspect of Christianity in Socrates and Plato. And this spirit, this conception, was not a conception of a personal spiritual salvation. Rather, that it was a conception that man's nature is such that man could know the principles that could not be seen, that underlie the physical principles that governed the universe, that governed the solar system, that governed the planet. And those physical principles could be discovered because of the nature of man. And they're knowable. These physical could be discovered and become knowable. And from that knowledge, humans can alter their circumstances and increase their power over nature. And some of the early figures of this movement were people like Nicholas of Cusa, Brunelleschi, who launched the Italian Renaissance. Da Vinci came a little later. And a little later after Da Vinci came people like Kepler. And not only can humans discover the unknown, but can change their relationship to the universe. Now this is a very radical idea because in general, whether you're, in general, and that's in those societies, it was a fixed society, it was a fixed world. Everything had its place, you had your place. Nothing changed. Nothing was supposed to change. And so what is the nature of humanity? What is the nature of a human being from this standpoint? That you could change the universe. You could change the world. You could change it physically, not just wipe out one people and replace them with another. You know, not that kind of change. But you can actually change the whole physical relationship of man and create an abundance, productive abundance. Now, this vision that emerged culminates in Gottfried Leibniz. It's not spiritual vision, it's not a material vision, but it is the substance of scientific and technological revolutions. But that conception of scientific technological revolution is based on a conception of man. And the vision is based on the idea that while we live in an imperfect society and only a few people I'm talking about in the past, only a few people have the leisure time to develop their powers of creativity, their powers of culture, to have a level of culture. If you were to change the production and you were to change the resource relationships, you could create the abundance so that the whole society could begin to enjoy those circumstances that will allow them to develop themselves. This is the idea behind the idea of technology that Leibniz develops, this idea of technology. He actually coined the term technology. And the whole idea was, how do you change this relationship? Now, it became obvious to the people of that time. It was obvious to Da Vinci. It was obvious to people at the time that there was an absolute limit to the productivity of your society, no matter how well it was organized. In places like China, it was very well organized. The Chinese were very well organized. The Indians and their system were very well organized, and they had large populations, but there was still a limit to the level of not just population, but the level of leisure time, the level of production. That what defined that limit was the fact that beyond human physical labor and animal physical labor and things like wind and maybe water flowing over, some kind of dam structure, there was no way to go beyond the limits that imposed. And Da Vinci understood this, and he was looking at at the engineering designs of things that would require a power that was not physical, physical human or physical animal power. And this developed into a project in the 17th century, the 1600s, for how do you develop some kind of combustible capability to generate something that will create, in this case, the steam engine. And so Leibniz was, and Leibniz's descendants, scientific descendants like Benjamin Franklin, they worked on this question. To them, this was the issue. How do you break the limitations of, and this was their vision, this was Franklin's vision. And he was the guy who organized the actual practical development of the steam engine in Great Britain when he was in Great Britain in the 1750s and 60s. He actually organized that. And Watt, who invented the steam engine, was part of a team under the Wilkinson company with Franklin overseeing the whole process. And this is, they actually made that breakthrough. And the vision was that this would essentially, and this was the essence of Hamilton's idea of the report on the subject of manufacturers. Because now you now have the issue of manufacturers, which are beyond human labor but using machines. And this is the beginning of the industrial transformation. And the vision that Hamilton had was that you would increase the productivity of these machines. These machines would produce technology and goods to increase the production of agriculture, and then agriculture would provide, and you would make agriculture more efficient, and you would have more people that would become available to become urbanized and further the development, and have more leisure to develop their capabilities. the idea of the Industrial Revolution was not just some materialist concept. It was a concept of giving humanity a quality of life, a quality of leisure that will allow them to become more human, or as Leibniz put it, or as Franklin developed it out of Leibniz, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is what they meant by the pursuit of happiness. And so this was the vision that that was born in a very real way. And this Industrial Revolution cannot be underestimated. Cannot be underestimated what its consequences were, and how by the time of Lincoln's death, assassination, you had the most incredible miracle had occurred in the northern part of the United States, where the productive forces had leapfrogged beyond anybody's imagination. And so you had this vision of what could be done. And believe me, nothing was more inimical or hated or feared to this empire that goes back to Rome and Venice and the British Empire of that day, which was a continuation of that. Nothing was more terrifying to them than this. This was what was terrifying them. This vision. So, so I'm going to go through three aspects of this vision, and look at it from three different standpoints. The first one is the vision of railways and railway connectivity. If you were living in the 1850s or the 1840s, and this is something that Grant did when he was a lieutenant.
Ulysses S. Grant.
Yeah, Ulysses S. Grant. He got orders to go to the West Coast to join a military grouping in California where the gold rush was getting underway. So this will be in the 1850s. And to get there, you had to either go around the Cape, the Horn, which was a very perilous sea voyage, or you had to stop off in Panama and use whatever transportation you could get across Panama to the other side to get on a boat to go to the West Coast. That was the only way to go. You could not realistically go across the country except in a covered wagon. And that was a whole other issue. You couldn't carry much with you, you know. And so this is what it was like. And Lincoln's idea, and the idea before him of John Quincy Adams, was we have steam engines, we have locomotives, we can create trains, we can create tracks, we can connect up the nation across this huge expanse with rail connectivity. And I cannot tell you what it meant to have a transcontinental railway to the people of North America, and in Canada too. They had their transcontinental railway. I cannot begin to tell you the consequence of this. This rail connectivity then transforms the space involved. And the vision behind that is the vision of making available this vast area for humanity, for the people. But more importantly, making it mentally available. Because it's not a big thing anymore. You can get on a train and go across the country. It's not such a big deal. It changes your whole concept of yourself. It changes your whole concept of the nation. It changes your whole concept of and this is all within a matter of 20 years, 25 years. People's lives are being transformed as this thing was taking off. And And what happened is that this ended up in an exhibition in Philadelphia, and the rest of the world saw it. Leaders from all over the world came. And they started to move to do the same thing. Russia, Japan, Germany, even China, and it was having a lot of trouble, was thinking along the same lines. And this was attacked by the empire, but the key thing is to understand that the anti-imperialism of the United States between the period of Grant and, despite some bad presidents, to McKinley, who was assassinated in 1901, the primary form of anti-imperial activity was to promote and build railways. To promote and build railways, to help build the Russians build the railways, to help the Germans build a railway, to discuss building a railway in Chinese, to start a railway in South America, to start railways in Mexico. That was their anti-imperial policy. The Germans continued that with they planned to build a railway from Berlin to Baghdad, and from the top of Africa, I believe it's from the
Cairo to Cape Town.
Cairo to Cape Town, they planned to build a railway. This is all in the late 1800s. I mean, and the empire reacted by pitting one nation against another after Bismarck got rid. Bismarck was onto this, but after he was fired in 1890, they began to pit Japan against China, Russia against Germany, France. You know, all these countries started to get lined up for war. And we had the World War I, we had World War II, we had the Cold War, we had the current war. And this thing never really has been fulfilled. From the time of for over 100 years, the full potential of this vision was never fulfilled, has not been fulfilled. And guess what? What do you think during this period this movement did? We saw that the Soviet system was going under. We saw that it was time to revive this vision, and we did. And it became known as the Eurasian Land Bridge. And that was in the early 90s, over 20 years ago. And this led to a lot of things, and then finally China adopted this vision. It's now their vision. And what are the Chinese doing now? They internally develop high-speed rail on a massive scale. They're expanding that high-speed rail capability. So now what do they want to do? They want to do the same thing the United States wanted to do in the late 1800s, which was what? Export high-speed rail all over the world. They are trying right now to get the United States to give them the opportunity to come in and help the United States completely rebuild its rail infrastructure with the Chinese know-how that's been developed in the development of China. It's the same idea. It's the same idea. And what does this do? Well, having high-speed rail in Canada and having high-speed rail connecting all of Canada and all of the United States is a huge change. It means you don't have to have all these trucks going everywhere because it's cheap. It'll be cheaper. You know, you can go back to you can have a transportation system that, but this is a vision, and then comes the biggest one of all. The biggest thing of all is, guess what? Canada. The Bering Strait Tunnel goes through Alaska and comes through Canada. That is huge, because that brings the entire Eurasian continent into coherence with North America by rail. It means Canada can now develop the North. It means Russia can now develop its north. It means Alaska can be developed. But even more so, it puts Canada in the center of the relationship between Eurasia and North and South America. I can't even begin to tell you what this means economically for Canadians, what this means in terms of your very existence, in terms of your development, in terms of the living standard that people are going to have here 20 years from now. You know, so, and this is the future. This is your future. This is not, we're not making this up now. If I told you this was your future, you know, 5 years ago, or 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, you would have said, "Oh man, come on now." But no, it's now real. The Chinese and the Russians and the BRICS nations, this is their policy. This is, they intend to do this. This is a vision that comes back from Europe, but is now being picked up by Asia. It's being picked up by India. It's being picked up, you know, it already existed in Russia, but it's being picked up. This is your future. Okay? So, now I go to the next angle. So in the Industrial Revolution, you had a chemical revolution. You had the development of coal, the development of breaking down oil into products. You had chemistry, the massive breakthroughs in chemistry and creating products and doing things. And you know, the Mendeleev table, which was very big development in chemistry, and the industrial applications. And then around the time of Einstein, you started to discover that there were there were forces at a smaller, at an atomic level that existed. And Curie's played a major role in this, Becquerel. And the idea was that there was this other force, other force, and then this became the opening to the atomic age. We haven't really made it into the atomic age. We made it into the atomic bomb age, but we haven't made it into the atomic age the way it could have been.
Shoot on A, the way it will be.
And the way it will be, exactly. And so, despite the fact that people's discovery of nuclear power came in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, nonetheless, this is the bright future of being able to produce the energy that is required. What kind of energy do you require? You require orders of magnitude more energy than you are producing now. You cannot do it with coal and fossil fuels. There's a boundary point. Even though it's not running out, it's still a boundary condition. You need to go to the nuclear age and beyond, and the ultimate area of the nuclear age is fusion power. And I've been told that there is a breakthrough has occurred in the experimental plasma in China, where they held they kept the plasma together for about 2 minutes, 120 seconds, which is a huge breakthrough. And so,
90 million degrees, yeah.
Yeah, 90 million degrees. So that's a huge breakthrough. But this is, the Chinese are committed to this. And with them, all of these other nations are committed to this. That is going to be our future. And this vision did not die. These countries have gone through hell under colonialism. In the 1800s, in the 1900s, wars. In the 20th century, they've gone through hell, revolutions, overthrows, famines, disease, everything. And that vision is still there, and it's coming on. It's coming on massively. That was the vision that Xi Jinping presented to Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Egypt when he visited Egypt. So this is the future, not the collapse of civilization. This is the real future, because the collapse of civilization is not a future. It's not a future. It's death. If humans survive it and you live in some kind of system, it's horrible. It's not worth living in. So, and now we come to the big one. This particular one, it's all connected, but this one is the one that really grabs humanity. And that is, the Wright brothers demonstrated, and others later demonstrated, that you could get off the ground in motorized form and fly. Da Vinci had all these designs for flying, but they didn't have a system to do it. In the early part of the 1900s, the Wright brothers demonstrated this. And others began to fly, and they began to build airlines and airplanes and what have you. Now, if you could fly, what keeps you then from being able to go outside the atmosphere? Okay? So, there was a man who was a scientist and an engineer. And his name was Hermann Oberth. And he started doing all of the preliminary calculations for space travel. He studied being in free gravity by jumping off cliffs and stuff like that, and jumping and go free fall. And he was doing all of the calculations. And then there was a movie called Woman in the Moon, which worked with Hermann Oberth. And this inspired a bunch of teenagers in the 1920s who became the leading rocket scientists later on. Werner Braun, Kraft Erika, and all of the top American and Russian rocket scientists came out of this movement that started in Germany in the 1920s. What was their vision? Their vision was to go into space. Well, what's the whole point of going into space? Because this is the next area to go. To explore, to go outside of the Earth, to explore, and most importantly, to change, to discover. Mainly to discover. And yes, there's all kinds of technologies come out of it and all of that, but it's this idea that who we are. It's very powerful. Extremely powerful. And it was the space program that Kennedy wanted to use to start to bring an end to the Cold War and bring the Soviet Union and the United States together around the common mission of a space program, joint space program. That was before he was assassinated, this was what he wanted to do. Because it's the space program which represented the future. And the future is what gives spiritual life to a society. The fact that they're thinking of a future, they're going into a future, they're making discoveries. And that is what is now coming back with the Chinese space program. And now the Indians are coming in with that, and the Russians are coming back with their space program, which was dismantled to a large degree. And Obama canceled, pretty much destroyed the U.S. space program, in effect. What was left of the space program that wasn't shut down, he pretty much destroyed it. I can go into more on what happened in the question and answers and the discussion. Now, this space vision is very important because this gets at the core of the essence of what mankind is. And also, if we're going to make discoveries about the nature of our universe, we're going to have to go outside the noise. We're going to have to go outside where we are now to be able to do the observations. And this is a key part of the Chinese space program, which is to put some kind of station on the side of the moon, which is never facing us. The back side of the moon, I guess they call it, or the far side of the moon. And this is their whole idea, is to go there. And so we make these discoveries, and so the idea of who we are is critical. And this is what the Kennedy assassination, the drug counterculture, all the wars, all the cultural, you know, this whole thing was designed to crush this vision, this future sense, the sense of future. And this sense of the future is so important that we're going somewhere, we're heading somewhere. Today will not be the same as tomorrow. You want to live in a world where everything is the same every day, forever? You know, I mean, that's sort of very basic, okay? That's sort of very basic. And so this desire for the future has been totally attacked. The British did a report called the Rappaport Report, which talked about this. And the Tavistock Institute, actually in the early 60s, said, this is the greatest threat. The U.S. space program, the belief in progress, the growing, the excitement around the future is our greatest threat. And that we have to crush it. And all the psychological warfare stuff, all the MK Ultra stuff, all the stuff you know about was directed against that. It was directed against this idea. However, it didn't work on the Chinese, who have brought it back. It hasn't worked. And we today are at that point where this infection can come back. It can come back to Canada, it can come back to the United States, it can come back to the European population as well. That's possible. And so I could say to you that going through a profound collapse of our system, financial system, a profound collapse of the ordering of the society, of who's got money and who doesn't, and who's privileged and who's not, and the shake-up that we are going to currently go through can be seen as a collapse of civilization, can be seen as a total collapse. But with this onrushing development from these parts of the world, you have a future potential. You have, it's not predetermined that we're all going to collapse into a population reduction, you know,